Today, you are going to take notes on all of the vocab terms that we will be using daily over the next 2 or 3 weeks in the Matter and Energy and Ecosystems unit. And for this vocab notebook, I want you to stay with me on the definitions, and I'm not going to have you insert pictures in this vocab notebook. So as long as you get the definitions, that's all you'll have to do for today as far as this vocab notebook is concerned. And you can use this to study for the vocab at the end. It will be on the test just like we've had in the past. There are 22 terms that we're going to learn for this unit. The first one is ecosystem. So an ecosystem consists of all the living, which we call biotic, and non-living, which we call abiotic, interactions in a particular area. So it's how everything in an area interacts in order to survive. An ecosystem consists of all the living and non-living interactions in a particular area. Consists of all the living and non-living interactions in a particular area. Next one is biodome. A biodome is a closed ecosystem made by humans. A closed ecosystem made by humans. So the biodome we learned about last week actually has 5 ecosystems inside of it. Each ecosystem has its own producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and some even have tertiary and beyond. Next one is biotic matter. So the biotic matter is matter that makes up the living and dead organisms in an ecosystem. Anything that is alive or was ever once alive is biotic. Matter that makes up the living and dead organisms in an ecosystem. In our sim, our biotic matter is primarily in the lower half of the sim, and the abiotic matter, which is our next term, is going to be in the upper half of the sim. Same thing with on the front wall. So abiotic matter is matter that makes up the non-living parts of an ecosystem, such as air, water, and rocks. Matter that makes up the non-living parts of an ecosystem, such as air, water, and rocks. So our sim doesn't really show water on the ground or rocks on the ground. That's why I said most of it is up in the air. Here on Earth, actually, there is abiotic matter down low as well. Next one. Organisms are living things such as plants, animals, and bacteria. Anything that's alive, such as plants, animals, and bacteria, we refer to as organisms. And really, that includes insects as well. Next one, producer. The producer is an organism that can make its own energy storage molecules, such as glucose. So, plants and algae are producers. Any organism that can make its own energy storage molecules. Such as glucose, which is the product of photosynthesis. An organism that can make its own energy storage molecules, such as glucose. So the producer makes the energy storage molecules, and then the consumer has to eat those energy storage molecules or eat the producer in order to go about its daily functions. So a consumer, our next one, is an organism that needs to eat in order to get energy storage molecules such as starch and fat and glucose. An organism that needs to eat in order to get energy storage molecules. There are different levels of consumers. Our next term is primary consumer. The primary consumer is the consumer who eats the producer, an organism that eats a producer to get energy. An organism that eats a producer to get energy. So it's like the first level consumer. In this picture, you see it's a snail. The snail is eating the plant, so it's primary. The next level up, second level or secondary consumer, is the organism that eats another consumer to get energy. So it's a second level consumer because it eats the primary consumer. An organism that eats another consumer to get energy. So typically, you don't see lions eating grass. Typically, lions will eat a smaller mammal that eats grass. They are secondary consumers. And that smaller ant mammal is usually what we call an herbivore. So the next one is herbivore. An herbivore is a primary consumer who eats only plants. The primary consumer who eats only plants or producers. So an herbivore can't produce its own energy storage molecules. The goat in this picture has to eat grass to get those ESMs, to get that energy. Usually goats only eat plants. But then there are other animals called omnivores that eat both plants and animals. So an omnivore could be a primary and or a secondary consumer who eats both plants and animals. A primary and or secondary consumer who eats both plants and animals. So Mushu, the manatee that we adopted at the beginning of the year, is normally typically classified as an herbivore because manatees dine on seagrasses. But every so often, there's a snail or a crab or something in those seagrasses that get into the manatee's mouth as it's chomping away, and it, without knowing it, consumes that primary consumer, so or decomposer, whichever one it is. So a manatee could sometimes be known as an omnivore, somebody who eats or something who eats plants and animals. And then the carnivore is a secondary consumer who eats only animals. Only meat. A secondary consumer who eats only animals. So they don't dine on producers. And I mentioned decomposers. A decomposer is an organism that gets energy storage molecules such as glucose by breaking down dead matter. So it's kind of the ones that break down everything. They aren't really at the top of the food chain, they're really at the bottom because they usually eat whatever goes down to the bottom, but they can break down everything and they're like kind of the last step in the food web. An organism that gets energy storage molecules such as glucose by breaking down dead matter. An organism that gets energy storage molecules such as glucose by breaking down dead matter. And those energy storage molecules we usually abbreviate as ESMs, capital E, capital S, capital M. And they are molecules that are significantly needed for life, such as fats, glucose, starches, and glycogen. And it's what we basically use to release the energy that we need to survive. So they're molecules such as fats, glucose, starches, and glycogen that organisms can use to release the energy needed to survive. We have 8 more. They release the energy needed to survive. Next one is carbon. Carbon is an element found in all living things that makes up molecules such as carbon dioxide and those energy storage molecules. They're the black dots that you see in the ESMs and the carbon dioxide. So they're found in everything that is alive or ever was once alive. Element found in all living things that makes up molecules such as carbon dioxide and energy storage molecules. Next, photosynthesis is the process by which producers use energy from the sunlight to change carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and glucose and ESM. Process by which producers use energy from sunlight to change carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and ESMs, glucose. Almost there. Next one's chloroplast. The chloroplast is the part of a plant cell where photosynthesis happens. It's only found in producers. So photosynthesis only happens in plants and algae. That's because they have chloroplasts. The part of a plant cell where photosynthesis happens, only found in producers, is the chloroplast. Oxygen gas is a molecule of 2 oxygen atoms released from producers as a product of photosynthesis. It's one of the products of photosynthesis. So plants take in carbon dioxide, and 2 things they give off are oxygen gas and ESMs. Molecule of 2 oxygen atoms released from producers as a product of photosynthesis. Next one, glucose, a molecule that organisms can use to release energy and that is made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. So it's the ESM that we focus on the most in this unit. And you guys kind of learned about glucose last year. I don't know if you remember it, but it's the molecule organisms use to release energy that's made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, and it's a product of photosynthesis. Three more. Cellular respiration. It's the chemical reaction between oxygen and glucose, so the products of photosynthesis, that releases energy into cells. The chemical reaction between oxygen and glucose, that ESM, that releases energy into cells. And if you look at the wall or if you look in the sim, everything has mitochondria in them. So everything has cellular respiration. Mitochondria are where the cellular respiration happens. So that's our next one, mitochondria. You've probably seen on TikTok, it's the powerhouse of the sun. It's the part of the cell where cellular respiration happens. Part of the cell where cellular respiration happens. So the producer gets energy from the sun, goes through photosynthesis, and it produces that oxygen and glucose, the ESM. That oxygen and glucose makes its way into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is where cellular respiration happens. That chemical reaction produces carbon dioxide and water. And this happens in the flower, the producer up on the wall, the snail, the primary consumer, the bird, the secondary consumer, and the decomposer. And the last one is carbon dioxide. It's the molecule made of carbon and oxygen that is released as a product of cellular respiration.